Good evening, everybody. Welcome to R&R episode 5. Today we're going to get into how to make meditation as easy as possible. Some of the obstacles that we face in our meditation process and practice that obstruct that. But we're going to begin with a quote.
Two quotes.
One is going to be from this book, I Am That, by Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj. That is a particularly powerful quote that I read the other week. So I'll begin. The questioner is speaking to the teacher, the guru, and he asks, where does it all lead me? Where does this all lead, this path? The Maharaja's response was, when the mind is kept away from its preoccupations, it becomes quiet. If you do not disturb this quiet and stay in it, you find that it is permeated with a light and a love you have never known, and yet you recognize it at once as your own nature. Once you have passed through this experience, you will never be the same man again. The unruly mind may break its peace and obliterate its vision, but it is bound to return, provided the effort is sustained until the day when all bonds are broken, delusions and attachments end, and life becomes supremely concentrated in the present. Questioner, what difference does that make? Maharaj, the mind is no more. There is only love in action. Questioner, how shall I recognize this state when I reach it? There will be no fear.
God, such a great
Such a good one, right? Yeah.
Just the way it ended.
Incredible.
Be no fear. Oh. So I'm going to start off my quote by a man named Chogyam Namkhai Norbu, who founded he's the founder of a movement called the Dzogchen movement.
Dzogchen community.
Dzogchen community, yep. He recently passed away, I believe, 3 years ago. And so this is one of his quotes from his book, Dzogchen, the Self-Perfected State. All the various types of teachings and spiritual paths are related to the different capacities of understanding that different individuals have. There does not exist, from an absolute point of view, any teaching which is more perfect or effective than another. A teaching's value lies solely in the inner awakening which an individual can arrive at. If a person benefits from given teaching, for that person, that teaching is a supreme path because it is suited to his or her nature and capacities. There's no sense in trying to judge it as more or less elevated in relation to other paths to realization.
Wow. Incredible. So what does that bring up for you?
In terms of our subject today?
Yeah, and the Namkhai Norbu quote, because I think this is great to get into.
I think obviously there's so many meditations out there, so many paths,
so many practices, countless.
With the same view of, okay, let's try to develop the mind, get enlightened and all that. I think of your approach to it in terms of your meditation practice, there is a foundation to it though. Yeah, it may look different, but there is a foundation of non-judgment, of love, of awareness, which is basically what he said. Obviously, it's a little bit more external, like, oh, don't judge a person's path.
Yeah, as higher or lower, or as yours is higher or lower.
And that's sort of a reflection of your own meditation practice. When you're meditating and when you see things arise or anger and frustration and these things, you're still in that very non-judgmental state, or trying to be. You're not, well, there's no trying in it, but you get what I mean. And so for me, when it comes to this quote, it's all about, in the beginning of one's practice, it needs to be understood that you're not trying to judge this practice, this thought, this emotion, this person. You have to try to awaken objectivity. Recognize that. And so when I started meditating, I didn't have any sort of notion of that. I just practice awareness and mindfulness to get something.
Right.
Because I want an enlightenment.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that Namkhai Norbu quote is very, very powerful to me, because in all the different sects of Buddhism, even particularly in Tibetan Buddhism that Namkhai Norbu is from, there's very strong sectarian divides on which path is the highest. And the various schools and traditions all look down at the other schools and traditions as being inferior, or not complete. Oh, so I find that interesting that literally every spiritual group does that. Almost all of them. There's a sense that whatever it is that they're teaching is the highest, and whoever their master is the greatest. And even if that's true, right? Even if that is the truth, the point is that's a reality that, at least at the current state that most of us are at, is unverifiable.
Right.
There's so much that we don't know, and I think there's a power in not knowing and in being open-minded. While it's good to be very committed to our specific path and our specific practice, I think it is important to understand how other people see the path of enlightenment and what they've written and collected and learned about this specific subject. So, and his point on the path that leads to a person awakening to their true nature, or a person realizing enlightenment, that path is the one that is most suitable for that person. So, for example, the kind of practices in Theravada for a person who maybe doesn't need so much regalia or doesn't have so much attachment to form and rites and rituals, Theravada and these kinds of practices that are just very direct and straight to the point, Theravada, Zen, Dzogchen, these work very well for people that they're not too attached to concepts, right? But there's a kind of person that, for example, they have a faith-based temperament. So the rites and rituals of the more, for example, esoteric sects of Buddhism are more suitable for them.
Yeah,
exactly.
Tibetan Buddhism.
It can lead to a generation of faith in the Dharma that will lead to an awakening. Whereas they try Theravada, for example, my sect, and they're like, this is too dry. There's nothing, almost nihilistic.
Right.
If people can get a perception of it like that, right? So what works for, ultimately, path is path, and of course, there's the assumption that the core of all of this is the same and is one, but how people go up that mountain can be very different. And what works for one person, what's suitable for one person, may not be very suitable for another, even though the Eightfold Path and the foundational principles are all the same, right? You have to be a virtuous person. You have to engage in right conduct, right speech,
love,
purification of mind, purification of view, purification of body. This is all, you can't sidetrack that. But how that actually will manifest and arise in a person's path can change depending on their orientation.
This kind of reminds me of one of our episodes where we talked about lineages. Each person's going to have their own lineage, and they're going to have their own sort of lessons and understandings tied to the lineage, tied to your teacher. But overall, like, who am I to judge that lineage? Who am I to judge? Yeah, my practice may be different. I may be part of Theravada Buddhism, but I'm looking at Tibetan Buddhism's kind of ritual practices where they use drums and throat singing and these mantra recitations. A lot of people can be like, oh, my practice is so much different. Why are they doing that? They're not going to reach that enlightenment. And for me, that's you separate yourself. That you have this projection of what the path looks like, what enlightenment looks like. But it's still a projection. It's the ideal of it. And how much you are actually disconnecting yourself and other individuals with that type of view. And how would you say this is connected to actual meditation practice?
Just the aspect of being non-judgmental. If you could be non-judgmental towards your own experiences, that's just as important as being non-judgmental towards other people's experiences and other people's path. whatever happens in our practice, we rest with a mind that is open and clear. And if there are delusions and specific obstacles that arise, we have to have the flexibility and wisdom to cut through those. But that's different than judgment. So when we're judging ourselves or judging another person's practice, what we're doing is we're really stepping into assumptions. Assumptions that are not verifiable.
Right.
So for example, the main assumption in one of these debates is, that wasn't in the Pali Canon, therefore it's not Buddhism. Major, and of course, if the entirety of existence and all the secrets of the universe are in the Pali Canon, then that's correct, right? So that would be a correct assumption. But I get the literalist point of view where, of course, Theravada is centralized around teachings of the Pali Canon. There's absolute place for that, and that conservatism has allowed that tradition to get to this point in history. The thing with the other sects of Buddhism, there's Mahayana and Vajrayana, there's so many sects and different philosophies, and those are not necessarily what the Theravadids see as the words of the historical Buddha himself. Right. So that's the basis of a lot of this particular argument. From my point of view as a practitioner, as someone who is living this, a lot gets missing in history. And I think that although I've read the Pali Canon, I read the commentaries, any person who practices seriously should read the canon and the commentaries. I really don't think the totality of existence and all the secrets of the universe and insight knowledges and whatever have been dictated and are contained in that book, in those set of teachings, as important as they are.
Right.
So to me, tasting things by direct experience is most important. And so how that can appear for a person could be different. For example, if your experience and the insight that you've directly encountered, the reality you've directly encountered, contradicts what's in the book, what are you left with? As a monk, or even as someone who's seen as respected in that specific tradition, you have the possibility of losing really all your credibility as soon as you step out of what is sanctified as truth in your specific sect of Buddhism. So, and the Dhammakaya tradition has a perfect, great example of this. Longpu Wapaknami discovered these Dhammakaya bodies, and he said, this is actually what the Buddha taught. And the Pali commentaries and the other commentaries, this is the missing teaching. This is why you can do all those practices and the defilements still don't vanish. But upon attaining the Dhammakaya bodies, the defilements vanish. He began to propagate these teachings in Thailand and was met with huge backlash. Because when you make discoveries like this that are not in accordance with the text, or maybe there's just pieces of it here and there, but it's not directly laid out. When you stumble into discoveries like this, you shake up the entire
foundation.
Yes, you shake up the entire institution that is built on the solidity of those teachings, of them being exact to the point what's in the book. So, and this was a great lesson that I learned from one of the teaching monks at the IDOT program that I did, 2 years ago. I ordained for 3 months as a monk, and he was just smiling. He's like, "What do you do if you discover something that's not in the canon? What do you do if you encounter an aspect of realization that is not sanctified and allowed necessarily by the community? Do you keep it to yourself, or do you go and teach it and risk losing all of your credibility?" And he said, it's up to every person who gets to that point to decide for themselves. But
in terms of meditation, I find that again, each individual is going to have obviously their own practice, but in their practice of meditation, each phenomenon that arises so naturally is going to be different. The thought forms that are coming out, the experience and what's going on in the practice, it's all so different. It's all, maybe this trauma is arising at a certain moment, whereas another person, they're in the first jhana,
right?
And it's important to remain as non-judgmental in your practice as possible, because when I started practicing, again, my goal was to achieve psychic abilities and get enlightened. I didn't know what that looked like.
Not just one. You got to have both.
Yeah, it's just, there was no idea of love there too. So just like enlightenment and psychic abilities. And I was focusing on it. And all these things that popped up in my meditation, I still had judgments. I still wasn't in the space of, I'm looking at these things that are arising and I'm labeling it and I'm identifying with it. As in, oh, I'm experiencing this like state of like light. I am the light. Maybe I'm getting closer to getting psychic abilities. Like I'm literally making my own route and judging it without just remaining, okay, this is what's arising naturally. And what I've come to learn in my practice now is, even if it's a negative thought, or what we consider negative, or a trauma or anxiety, notice how the mind judges it. Notice how the mind separates. Even if your body wants to reject it, it's perfect that you're aware of it. It's perfect that you're noticing these things. Notice how the mind judges. Notice how your mind makes these stories. And it's okay. It's okay to not be happy in your practice. You're going to have those days. They're going to have days where there's no light, there's no bliss. It's all right. And how that kind of come across in your daily life is, you're going to notice these people that are where you used to be separate from you, different path. Maybe they're angry. Maybe you used to not like them, and then you realize, wow, I'm not as judgmental of this person anymore, of this practice, of these saints or whatever. I don't know if you've come across that in your practice. And
yeah, I think it brings me to the concept of ego, right? When we're talking, a lot of spiritual teachers talk about ego, and I think the simple way to describe that is reactive mind. Ego and the sense of self, the reactive mind with the sense of self is basically what we designate the term ego to. So in meditation, when we're learning to just observe, we're learning to get in touch with, or we're actually, an awareness that is beyond thought is beginning to manifest. And what begins to happen is that the patterns of the reactive mind and the reactive mind itself, it'll be seen as arising within that awareness, within that mind. Whereas previously you have full identification with the reactive mind. You're just absolutely in it. Whereas as a result of practice and as a result of mindfulness and observation, there comes an opening, a phase in your development when you actually begin to see the reactive mind and its patterns and how it judges this and categorizes this and does that. And it's all predicated on the sense of a self. So as a result of further meditation, that the tendency for that reactive mind to be very, very chaotic and really consume the predominance of your awareness decreases. And that's, I consider that purification of mind. So previously you had an affliction and it would completely take you over, but now you actually see that the affliction is arising within a field of awareness,
right?
And that it passes. It's something that arises and passes.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think that observation, that non-judgmental faculty that we're cultivating in meditation and in path is totally related to that. You're able to see your own reactions as just thought forms, as just reactions. In the seen, there's only the seen. In the heard, there's only the heard. In the cognized, there's only the cognized. These are Buddha quotes.
Right.
So when we're able to see the reactive mind and awareness just present and reactivity waning, the reality of that reactive mind and the solidity of it, the solidity of the habits and the reactions it just becomes, it's just not as real at all as it used to be. So that's the benefit of continuing to meditate and continuing to do this. It's as if your mind and your being, in a way, becomes more spacious, and things you previously identified with, like the entirety previously, ego and reactive mind, that's the predominance of your identification. You're like, yeah, my stories, how I react, how I feel, that's all me. And as a result of path, that way of seeing things, that way of perceiving things changes drastically.
I know when in the beginning of actually starting to, I would describe it as actually practicing meditation, right? Obviously you go through stages of, I'm starting to, yes, I'm fully in this state of, I am in the anxiety, I am the frustration, I am this trauma. At a certain point, you start to see a separation happen. You actually start to observe, this is what's going on. Oh, this is what's happening. And you're not gaining anything. You're just realizing, purification is happening. The awareness is just expanding that you already have. There's nothing to gain in the practice of meditation. And so once the awareness starts to even grow further, you start to, the non-judgmental faculty really starts to see things as non-separate. Like, yeah, this is arising. It's a weird sort of perception that happens. It's not even a perception. I like the way you described it earlier. The herd is the herd. What was it? What was the Buddha quote?
In the seen, there's only the seen. In the herd, there's only the herd. In the cognized, there's only the cognized.
Yeah, and it's almost like a crystal ball. Your mind becomes literally a crystal ball, so purified, so clear. There's nothing that, like, if you see the reflection of everything, but it's still inside this crystal ball. Everything arises in it, but it's still clear. There's no muddiness behind it. You're not this mirror that has smudges in it.
It's like the filter in a way.
Exactly.
It's gone.
Exactly. And depending on where you're at, maybe you're in the state of that kind of, I'm starting to see things as separate, or maybe you're still inside I am the thoughts, I am these things. It's always important to have that beginner's mind, and how important for me that is. Because again, people may think, I'm progressing further. Be careful on what you mean about that. What do you mean that you're progressing? Are you gaining something? Are you progressing in the fact that your mind is expanding? Are you identifying with the progression? You know what I mean?
Yep. The thing with progressing is, of course, in the relative view, a person progresses in meditation. Yes. They accumulate more merit. The mind becomes more purified. There's more stillness. If a person starts a meditation retreat and they're in momentary concentration, and at the end of that meditation retreat, after 2 weeks, they've entered the first jhana, there's progression, right? So from that point of view, and from the point of view of being a person on the path, we can look at things in terms of progression and accomplishments. So the reason that many of the teachings, particularly in Zen, for example, in Dzogchen, have as a part of their view, nothing to gain, no path, no accumulation, this sort of thing, is because when we're with these attainments and accomplishments and movement and development, we can create a sense of self out of that. And what can come out of that sense, what the base of self, the base of delusion, is this whole identity and sense of self. So not only is it a view, an orientation in Zen and these other traditions, but it's also from the absolute point of view, right? If everything's empty, if everything's just skandhas, aggregates, vibrating, arising, and passing in this emptiness, then there's nothing to gain, correct? So if all we are is skandhas, if all we are is aggregates, consciousness, perception, form, if that's all that our experience is, what is it that is being gained. So do particles gain anything? If the particles in this, if my body has these particles and then an awakening happens and the particles change, is it really that the particles have become more accomplished? No. So from one point of view, from the relative, yes, there's gain, there's change, there's merit, there's things that arise and pass, there's development as a spiritual being, correct? But also from the absolute point of view, if we look at things purely from a perspective of anatta, that there's no self and that everything is just its constituent and composite parts, there's nothing but particles. That's a crushing truth, but this is Dhamma, nothing but particles. The consciousness aggregate is just particles that are consciousness aggregates. The rupa, form, is just form particles. Energy in the body is just energy particles. Sensation is just sensation particles. And all of that is impermanent. So that's why Buddhism is, of course, directed at the thing that is permanent.
Right.
The thing that is deathless, nibbana. So, but this is how even a person that is having great spiritual awakening, because they're beginning to progress through these very refined states of awareness, really, can still reify a self out of that.
Well, like, to give an example, even today, on a more experiential level, people can see how spiritual communities or spiritual individuals can still have an ego. You can dress a certain way, you can act a certain way. I can act like a guru, I can behave like a guru, but how much of it is still an egoic tendency, a programming of mine? Like, if I become a yoga teacher and I start having long hair, do all these stretches, and there's a conditioning for that. We have a projection of what that looks like, right? How it's so fascinating to me how we have these sort of categories in our minds to sort of condition us to still have an ego, even if you're spiritual. The conversation about non-duality, conversation about deathlessness and egolessness can still have an egoic tendency.
Totally. I have more deathlessness than you.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm enlightened. What are you?
Yeah. You're obviously, you obviously have more of the awakened consciousness than whoever else, right? And even if that's true, right? Even if it is true, to operate from that is still to operate from a sense of self.
Right.
A sense of me. So and that's where I remember you talking about this previously, that this whole, like, you even see anatta as a guard, as a shield, that view of selflessness as a shield, because you've seen great, incredible healers and people run into all sorts of problems when their sense of self gets too big.
And this is a good segue to what I wanted to say about love and kindness, and how important that's a part of your practice, and how important you need to practice love and kindness. A lot of healers, for example, as I stated in a previous episode, they're great healers, but there's still something off. They're not operating of fully love and compassion. They may at a certain point be operating almost mechanically, like I have this healing ability.
I've got the laser gun.
And that's all it is.
Right.
And the second thing is, you can start to identify as, I am the healer. These are my incredible abilities. It's not coming through, like, you're solidifying an ego.
It's I am versus the conduit.
Yes.
Being the conduit.
Yeah. And so when I was practicing meditation in the beginning, I didn't practice love and kindness because I hated it. It felt like I was progressing slowly. It's like, oh my God, I'm not feeling it. I can't even feel love. What's the point of this? I'm just going to practice awareness, and somehow I know love and kindness is going to flourish. And then it happened. It never happened.
Well, I think because the awareness has to come from a sense of letting go for that to actually start to open up. If the mindfulness is coming from a place of control and is very directed, I feel that may not arise. But if you're just being open,
yes,
I think that surely
exactly
it can arise.
Again,
that heart opening.
my directness to meditation was enlightenment, psychic abilities. There's no loving kindness.
Right.
There was no loving kindness in that. Some people can't do that. They can have awareness and expands into this love, and they get these abilities or enlightenment, whatever. But when I was practicing, I didn't care about loving kindness. I saw it more as a blockage. Because ironically, there was a bunch of blockages.
Yeah, you're like, I don't even know why this is in the commentaries. I mean, why is this even in the teachings
Or just
to begin with?
Yeah, or like the previous episode, the Eightfold Path, like being a right, having right view, speech, all those things. I'm like, yeah, that will come eventually. I'm not, I don't need to practice it fully. There's something off
about that.
And so
off about that.
One of the things I advise people to do when they practice meditation is when you have those moments of extreme, like, oh, I'm feeling anxious, or I'm feeling this thought form. Watch how your mind rejects it. At the end of your meditation session, spread love and kindness to those thoughts, those negative thoughts, the negative side of you, the side of you that you may not want to see. And how important that is, it goes into even being non-judgmental about it.
The prominent function of loving kindness, when I've shared it and when I've experienced it, and we do loving kindness at the end of every meditation. So it's not only to share the blessings and the merit of that practice and of that session, but the function of loving kindness is that the heart is being extended beyond the boundaries of the personal self.
Right.
You initially have loving kindness for your body, for your mind, for yourself, and then you extend that loving kindness to other people, and eventually you extend it to the whole world. Not only is it a purification of mind, but it's a way to actually, in essence, it's a way for non-duality to arise, for inseparability to arise. Your awareness is really going out like this,
right?
And you're encompassing all beings in your heart. So there's something very powerful about doing that at the end of meditation. It's not just this like thing that we do that we can overlook at the end of meditation. Yeah. Like so many people think it's like, oh, I don't want to do this loving kindness thing. I just wanted to meditate and have it be.
I want to relax just a little bit
and have it be for me.
Yeah.
But that extending the heart to everyone, so much of this is about getting out of the way. So much of this is about egolessness. So much of this is about non-self. And that resistance that we have to prayer, that resistance that we have to loving kindness is just a reaction of the self. It's just a manifestation of the reactive mind. Right. You don't want to get on your knees and ask for guidance. You don't want to repent to the Buddha. You don't want to extend your heart because you're closed off. So a lot of this has to do with surrendering.
Right. And what's funny about that, something that arises in me was some people, it's easier for them to spread love and kindness. Much easier. For me, it was much harder to spread love and kindness because I felt the blockages. But also, some people, they can practice love and kindness, spread it all out. But when it comes to the end where they bring it back into themselves, how much blockages they feel from that. It's easy to spread it to everyone. When it comes back into them, so much in there.
Yeah, that's a great point too. And initially in the commentaries and practice, the body and the mind is the initial object of loving kindness, and then from here you extend it outwards. Mm-hmm. But in our society and in our time, we have a lot of limiting beliefs and baggage about ourselves, and that can definitely obstruct the capacity that you have to be your own friend. I mean, how much of us are friends to ourselves, to the stories in our heads? It's like we're like more hostile. Oftentimes we can be more hostile towards ourselves than other people.
Right. So. Even the fact that we push back on our thoughts, even that begins a sense of, I shouldn't feel this way. I shouldn't feel this or this. who says? Like, it's important for you to feel it first, notice it, because that's truth in that moment. Those things are arising, and it's okay. That to me is a part of love and kindness. Why? Because you're watching things arise naturally. And if you have love and kindness in your heart, that's great. That makes it so it purifies it even more. Anxiety, tension, trauma passes by. Love and kindness is there. It's perfect.
Mm.
You're always going to have those moments, no matter what. In your practice, you're going to have those moments, and it's really important to understand love and kindness in this sense.
Yeah, one of my teachers explained that loving kindness is protective meditation.
Right.
It's also to protect yourself from the difficulties, can help you with the difficulties of the path, right? As insight into selflessness of this dimension becomes more matured, there's some resistance and some issues that can come up with that.
Right.
A lot of resistance and even conflicts. So these divine abidings, the Brahma Viharas, they're considered protection meditations. When a person has a heart of loving kindness and they've done that practice, in the suttas and in the teaching it says they're favored by devas. They're protected by the gods because that person has a pure heart and a pure mind.
Right.
So.
And I know it's difficult for people to feel love and kindness if you have a difficult life. I know it's sometimes hard to feel even love for your situation or this world. Some people have disgust for this world and feel as if the world's unfair. And I would say even notice that. Just be aware of it and what arises in you when you put love and kindness there. Because before I used to have a lot of disgust and even hatred for a lot of things. I think we all have had that before once in a while. And when love and kindness was introduced, I started to, it takes time, but there is a perfection to this. There is a perfection to this because you break down the barriers that prevent love and kindness to be spread to the entirety of this existence.
Yeah. To all beings in every direction, near and far.
We're not separating anything. We're not. This is how forgiveness comes out. You're saying it to people that even hurt you, that hurts people. It's important for that. Yourself that has hurt yourself. All these things and how important that is.
Yeah, the final object of the loving kindness practice is an enemy. Someone that you actually have hatred towards, or someone that harmed you. If you indeed have a person like that in your life or in your past. And for a person to have pure unconditional love and a meditation towards someone that they actually hate, that is a very powerful thing. That requires a lot of letting go. That requires a lot of forgiveness. That requires a lot of non-ego to be able to do that.
Right.
So that's the function of that practice. And to tie this back around to how this makes meditation easier, which was the subject of this, of this talk, is that the smaller the ego is, the less solid the reactive mind is, the less, it's like the size of your sense of self, the more minute that is, the easier it is we're able to let go. It's humbleness.
Right.
So the bigger our sense of self is, the more we want to hold on, the more we want to control. And that is what makes meditation difficult. We want things to be a certain way based on what we've read in a book or based on what we've heard from another practitioner. And we try to contort our experiences to fit those concepts. That's because we're still involved. We want it to be a certain way. Meditation is really about having things be as they are, being able to observe things as they are. So tends to be the case that the more humble you are, the more open-minded and open-hearted you are, the easier it's going to be to not try to control, to not get in the way of the meditation.
And we both heard this sort of story in the Bible, or like a verse where they described the banquet. If you put yourself in the highest seat of the banquet, the host of the banquet is going to put you in the lowest seat. But if you remain in the lowest seat of the banquet, the person hosting it will raise you in the highest seat. And how true that is. When you always stay in this humble course, and you're not trying to prove to yourself, to people, you're not trying to be this person in your meditation practice that's going anywhere. You're just fully there, not doing anything, in the sense of, I'm just aware. I'm just aware of whatever arises. Just watching. How that just elevates you so quickly. And even in external life, that you see yourself elevate if you stay in that humble course. You really do.
This is really the essence. I mean, this is one of the essences and important and main points of monasticity. Shaving your head, and being an ascetic of any sect, really. The idea that you're forgoing your previous self, that you're forgoing attachments to the world. It's not just an outward garb. It's an inward orientation, right? You're becoming a person that's not so attached,
right? And
that helps awaken a mind that is free and still and able to be in the now. Situation is, if we're engrossed in so many activities and we have so many desires, our mind's always moving, and it can never really come to its own present, still nature when we're too fixed on form,
right,
and time. So this is the function of like letting go of these ideas of having to get somewhere in our meditation. Like, of course you're going to get somewhere in your meditation.
Right.
Of course, after 10 years, you're going to be better off than you were 10 years previously.
Right.
No doubt about that. But the idea of getting somewhere and getting something, that idea, that concept keeps you in time.
Well,
it keeps the mind continuing to grasp. But if we can let go of that, then that really, all those ideas are not there in that stillness.
Well, like when you were saying, I remember doing this, like, 5 years, I'm just meditating, I'm going to get this. I'm in the space of time and thinking, this is what, I'm solidifying what's going to happen. I'm taking control.
Yeah, you have no idea what's going to happen.
And that's not surrender. And this comes to
idea what's going to happen.
And that's important to remember too, how much surrender plays a part in your practice. Right. Surrender is awareness. You're surrendering to whatever arises.
Out of the way.
Meditation moment.
There was no one in the way to begin with. It takes time to see that. But
yeah, in terms of surrender, for me, what I've learned with surrender is it allows awareness to be solidified even more. I think there's no difference between awareness and surrender.
Well, I think with the surrender is still an action.
Right.
Right. Surrender is still a dropping. Letting go is still an activity. It's still a doing. Right. It's just a refined, beneficial, subtle one.
Right.
But awareness itself is not an action.
Right.
It's an aggregate. It's a basic innate nature.
Right.
Yeah.
And the reason why I compare them is because I find that in terms of the definition of surrender, for me, I see it as you're dropping everything.
Yeah, and then
obviously there's a doing behind it, but it almost leads to even the term awareness is a doing. You're doing.
Yeah. If you're doing awareness.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're applying awareness, it's an action.
Yeah.
But awareness itself is not an action. It's an aggregate. It's consciousness.
Right.
So I think that what happens after you surrender, that is where
whatever it comes out.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. That's
sense. Where the gold is. Yeah. Because the issue is that the reactive mind and the ego is holding on, and the solidity of that is what's keeping us away, is what is obstructing the consciousness, the recognition of the mind and the Buddha nature. But once that is let go of, like you said, surrender, and boom.
Because there's something in the way.
Yeah. Ultimately, you're right. This surrender and if we want to call it a ground, surrender and that consciousness ultimately are not different. right? Because even when you're in presence and in awareness, you can surrender.
Right.
So it's still just another aspect of the movement of any movement in the mind, really. Once that nature is recognized and that presence is recognized, everything is present.
Right.
Everything is inseparable from that. So it's like ultimately, yes, the surrender as an action is the same thing as the awareness as a non-action.
So kind of going back to where you were saying with time, we all have a goal for meditation in the beginning. Oh, I want to be more relaxed. I want to be more happy. And for me, that it definitely got me to meditate, and it led me down a path, right? I'm not negating the fact that I had a goal in the beginning. Now what arises, I don't really, I'm just practicing. But at a certain point, that goal for me, it annihilated, or that like what I wanted before completely vanished.
Mm. Well, the thing is, the goal that you're seeking is just another thought.
Right.
Like the reality of enlightenment that is in our mind is literally just another thought.
Right.
So even if that reality is true, our conception of it is not the reality.
Mm.
So when Bodhidharma sat in front of a wall and stared at it for 9 years, he probably had a notion at some point that there's unfolding, and you go through the grounds and paths of a bodhisattva, all that. But most likely he was just looking at the wall and in non-conceptuality. That's probably what predominated most of his experience. But I'm assuming that, I don't know, because I didn't know Bodhidharma. But
and so in terms of goals and these things, it's another thing to note is all these things in your meditation practice is but a byproduct of the practice itself. Your happiness, the calming of the mind, all these things do come with the practice, but it's of the byproduct of it. Your practice is what maybe your shamatha practice, your concentration practice, the choiceless awareness practice, but everything besides the practice is still the byproduct. But I think it's good to know, I don't know what your opinion is, but it's good to know the difference between, again, the people that desire happiness and those that desire higher states of consciousness, or quote unquote those types of things.
What do you
like what I mean about that is, like, a lot of people want to be happy.
Oh, they want to meditate to be happy.
To be happy, yeah,
sure.
And so then you have other people that their goals is to have higher states of consciousness.
Right.
How would you explain it to them that, like, are these goals feasible? Are these good to have? Is there a difference? Even though the goals look different, are they different? What do you think?
I think as a person wakes up and as their practices refine, as a byproduct, they become happier. So as these more refined states of consciousness unfold, more refined aspects of ourselves, or of our, whatever we want to call it, manifest, happiness is a byproduct of that.
Mm-hmm.
So as the mind unfolding in its stillness, and the process of mind becoming more silent and more still in samatha, for example, that leads to lots of happiness. But the happiness that is the goal in many of the paths I've looked at is like an unconditioned happiness. It's a happiness that's not dependent on anything. It's just a happiness that naturally is present, that naturally arises.
Yeah.
And that happiness doesn't come from the journey of getting it, right? So U.G. Krishnamurti talked about this, and his quote was, your idea of inner peace is the very thing that obstructs the inner peace that is natural to this body. It's like the happiness is actually essential to the nature of the mind. The luminosity is essential to the nature of the mind. When we're meditating and it's unfolding, we're not getting, like we say getting brightness, like as if it's in some external thing that comes into the meditation. Right. What's happening is that we're at coarser levels of the mind, like we're at the outside layers of the onion. And as we go to deeper layers of our nature, deeper layers of the onion, those layers have specific qualities. And one of those qualities is luminosity. Right. And the closer and the deeper that awareness goes, the more brightness, the more happiness, the more luminosity there can be in a specific practice. So that idea of always seeking happiness and trying to get happiness and peace in form or in accomplishment or in becoming something, all of that is a happiness that's conditioned by those things, is dependent on those things, is dependent on you becoming someone, and then it's dependent on you reaching a goal. Once you've reached that goal and you've had that happiness, now you need another goal. Right. You need another happiness. This is not the happiness that is necessarily intrinsic to the nature of mind. It's dependent on stuff.
So I have a friend. This is a sort of external example. He wanted to become a hotshot firefighter, which is like a high position in firefighting, and he got it. He got it eventually, and I think by his first season, he told himself, "Now what?
There you go.
Now what am I supposed to do?"
I love Think and Grow Rich. Napoleon Hill, Law of Success, great stuff. So one of he was in an interview and someone asked him, what happens once you achieve your definite chief aim in life, your life purpose? Pause. Get another one, right? And by all means, in the material dimension, that's fantastic, right? You can always do more and give more and become more and whatever, but that never ends. This process of
chasing,
this idea of personal development never ends, and that's the beauty of it, in the sense that you could always contribute more and expand on your skills and become a virtuoso or a genius or something. But that doesn't really have anything to do, in my opinion, with or not much to do, at least, with discovering the absolute deathless transcendent reality, right? So it can be an expression of that, and oftentimes art is an expression of this transcendent mystery that is within us and within our existence. But here in this context, we're talking about specifically path and the unfolding of that. So a lot of these drives and purposes that we have, I think Eckhart Tolle made a good point of this, is that purpose is basically a minor purpose to our major purpose of waking up. And oftentimes when a person starts to wake up, when that actually begins to happen, mind encounters itself. Presence is manifesting. Buddha nature is there. Those goals and purposes and desires that they previously had, they can seem so small in comparison to the totality of your true nature. So this is the thing. With the goals and the happiness and the inner peace, my take is that all of that is naturally within you, and you don't even need to do anything external to get that. But if I'm a motivational speaker, I have to tell you that there's you got to get this and you got to get that. But from so many people I've met who've done the meditation and who've really awakened in that way, they've said, yeah, the goals are great, and it's good to be functional and person that contributes to society, but this is a lot bigger than that.
Man, you just reminded me of so when I was going to become a monk for the first time, I remember speaking to another guy who was already a monk before, but was doing another ordination. He asked me, so what brings you here? Like, why do you want to become a monk? So, I just really want to meditate, and honestly, I want to open up my third eye.
Yeah, you open it.
And he looked at me and said, yeah, that, I once wanted that too. I remember judging him for that.
I remember you calling me.
Yes, I called
me, and you said, "Hey, I met this guy, and he's ordaining, and all he wants is to just be happy."
Yeah, I'm like,
what? But there's a beauty in that simplicity of just wanting to be happy, even though it's a want and a desire. It's not. I feel that there's not so much self behind it. Right. It's not this huge I'm going to become this and all that. I just want to be happy. So I think in a way there's something like the spiritual greed ranking on that is like near zero. You know, you just want to be happy.
And the third eye one was like up here.
Yeah, which is fine. If a person wants to open their third eye and awaken their kundalini and go out of body and do all that stuff, like there's a place for that, and there's practices for that. That's fine. But it really just depends on the orientation that we have towards it, you know, because all of those powers are in the teachings. They're not, this notion that they're not there is just absurd. You know, it's like blatantly obvious.
Right.
Commentaries say this is exactly what you need to do to develop clairvoyance.
Well, that
right there.
Yeah, Taoism, Hindu texts, Buddhist texts, you have saints in the Bible.
Right.
There's it's like mystical powers. Like there's in every sort of religious society.
Yeah, but the point I think that the wise teachers make is that can be a deterrent.
Right.
Right. And even in the Buddhist Pali commentaries, one of the corruptions of insight is supernormal powers. Literally, it's one of the corruptions. So it can inhibit wisdom. Why? Because it's something that we can become attached to.
Again, like what I was saying about the healer. Like, I have these mystical powers.
And we've met people like that, so they're very impressive. So it's extremely easy. Like it's like, wow, it's incredible that you can do that. Like people bow to you, you know.
Yeah.
So I think with that amount of power
comes
a lot of responsibility. Yeah, Spider-Man, Peter Parker, just dropping quotes. But hey, everyone, I think we're about to hit the top of the hour here. So I think we'll wrap it up for today.
Is there
final words?
Yeah, is there anything you want to say in terms of advice for meditation for people?
Get out of the way. Stop. Just stop. I don't mean stop like forcefully, right? I just mean just drop it. Just let it go, right? And see what happens. See what happens. See what happens when you release control. See what happens when you finally get out of the way. That's it. What about you?
Love more. Don't try to force love either. Notice when you do your loving kindness practice, notice what's arising. Is there blockages? Is that what's truth in that moment? I'm not saying this is for everyone, but when you practice love, just be aware what naturally arises from it. Can you send love? Can you feel the abundance of love? Is this getting more natural? Practice more love toward each other.
That's awesome. I love that. All right, everyone. Well, thanks for tuning in to R&R. And next week, we'll be back here to discuss another topic, probably answer some questions that we get through the week. So
awesome.
All right, everyone. Have a wonderful evening. See you next time.